Welcome to the Choirlosophy Podcast. This edition of Choir Director Problems is brought to you by Sight Reading Factory. The obvious connection for me with this little segment for Sight Reading Factory is that I'm going to use in this episode my Sight Reading Factory assessment grading practices as a way to demonstrate how I have shifted my thinking over time to evaluating and assessing students in a choir class based on their growth from where they started, rather than achieving some arbitrary goal that I have set out for them before I even met them. And we do that with Sight Reading Factory. And so they're an invaluable tool that you can use as well. And hopefully this episode spurs some ideas of how you can use it. But you can get your membership for you and all of your students. They get their own individual login where they can see assignments that you've created for them. They can see your comments on those assignments. They can see whether they've passed or failed all through there. And then you can export all that information when it's time to put in your grades as a spreadsheet. It's just awesome. So you can get that membership for you and your students with a 10% discount every time you sign up by putting Choirlosophy at checkout. Get all your order ready, and then there'll be a coupon code box that you can use there. And also, this episode is going to remind you of some features over at the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Choirlosophy has some rubrics that I've used and put up there in the past. You have to scroll down to episode 21. You also can get some patron-only episodes there for as little as $3 a month. So head over there and check that out. Lastly, before we dive in, I'm trying to put together a convention, an in-person choral convention. Not sure if there's going to be a demand for this, but I know I'm hungering to get together with some of you all in person. I was looking forward to the conventions this next year, hopefully being in person. But one of the challenges when the big organizations do these things is they're huge. Being able to guarantee distancing and safety protocols and even being able to take the financial risk of reserving that kind of a large space is prohibitive right now. So I'm thinking, let's do something small with 60 people or so. And so right now we're looking at Atlanta in April on a weekend. I'm still negotiating some things there. So each time I put out an episode, I'll update you. And then for future people listening to this, maybe this will become a thing that we do in the future. Head over to ChoirlosophyCon 2021 on Facebook. There's a small group there growing of people who are interested in seeing if they can work that into their schedule and helping me plan a choir director problems segment. I haven't done one of these in a while, and unlike the other ones that I've done in the past, I can't promise that this one will be funny or snarky. This was just something that was creeping around in my mind this week and last week, really, as we started to come back to school, and just having a lot of thoughts about the way I've graded in the past, and then putting those philosophies of the way I've graded in the past up against the current reality. And does it hold true? Do the same things that I prioritized before still hold true in our current environment? And I would say mostly yes. But partly because a couple years ago, I went through a philosophical second guessing myself of how I'd graded for a lot of years. Just for context, I've got 18 years of doing it of a lot of different ways over the course of my teaching career. And so in this little talk, I'm just going to share some ideas with you about the concept of, and really the problem that I think we in our profession have to continually balance between holding our ensembles and our students to high expectations, setting goals that are lofty for them, musical ideals that they should have to achieve or we should help them achieve, but at the same time being able to meet each student where they are and help them love singing. Is there a way to balance those things? In other words, do you have to be the choir program that just everybody's amazing all the time? And if they're not amazing, they get a D and they think they suck at singing forever? Or do you have to be the program that just loves everybody and there's no audition and everybody is told they're awesome all the time? Or is there something in between? Can there be a balance where the choral program that you run is truly excellent and is making high-level sounds that other ensembles in your area aspire to, but also meeting every single student at the level that they are at when they come in the room and still making them feel valued? So frequently, I hear these presented as a dichotomy. Like, are we going to be an inclusive, welcoming choral program that doesn't hold kids to these arbitrary standards of musicianship and are we elitist? All right, that's how we frequently get it, have it framed. Or are we shooting for being an elite choral program? And in my mind, in my early career, I definitely fell on the side of we want to be like the best possible choir. We can be the best possible choir if I kick the crap out of the kids when they come in the door and expect great things out of them and hold them to this high standard, especially with the way I grade, which is quite tough, and it still is quite tough. But where my shift happened, was when I started to believe and experience that there actually can be a balance between those two ideals. Again, between the ideal of are we a top flight elite program, or are we a program that believes that every student can sing and every student should be welcomed and be a part of the program? I think you can be both. Okay? I think that you can actually be both. And one of the reasons that I started to shift towards that idea is as we started to do more and more with music literacy, starting about 10 years ago or so, and this is, I'm old, so going back to when I first started teaching sight reading on a daily basis to kids at the high school choir level was not the norm. And in a lot of places it still isn't, but it wasn't the norm 18 years ago. Definitely not 25 years ago or whenever I was in high school. That was not the norm. Typically, for example, when I was young, we would sight read on Wednesdays. Sight reading Wednesdays, and we would look at the concepts of literacy maybe once a week, and oftentimes if we were busy we would just not get to it. So in that environment, looking back, and that's also how I started my teaching career, was sight reading once a week. One of the arguments against driving harder towards literacy was that it starts to prioritize literacy over other forms of learning and other types of musical goals. But in my experience, that hasn't been true. So let me see if I can walk you through that. So by focusing more in the classroom on a daily basis for 5 to 10 minutes, which is really what we do, on literacy at the beginning of each class, what we now experience in my choir class, and this is, pre-COVID, right now we're doing weird stuff because of the online, as I discussed. But right now, the norm in our choir class is that the notes and rhythms are learned so quickly that we have lots of time to talk about other things, lots of time to connect, lots of time to talk about text, to talk about the historical and social contexts of the songs that we're singing. So it's the investment of time in literacy that has really kind of opened my eyes to the idea that you can hold them to really high expectations while also finding a place, an entry point for every single student. So in order to do that, I had to go through this process over many years of how do I grade the kids? And okay, so if I'm going to set up this new expectation that we're all going to learn how to read music, all of us, how do I grade them on it? We've got some kids that come in 9th grade, they've been in choir a bunch of times or been in band, orchestra, they already kind of read, right? Which kind of actually going back to the old way of doing it once a week, that actually was elitist, looking back on it. Because when we were only teaching them to read one day a week, the only kids who ever got good at it were the kids with other musical enrichment in their life. They were the kids who took piano lessons, took band and orchestra. Those were the kids when I was a kid and when I was starting out as a teacher who could ever figure out to learn how to read music, because we were only doing it once a week. So you needed that enrichment or that scaffolding, that knowledge underneath what we were doing in choir in order to even have a hope that you'd learn to read music. So we expanded it out, and now in our program, everybody can read. Everybody can. Doesn't mean they're all just as good as each other at reading, but they can all read by the time they finish a year in choir. Okay, so here's the idea. This is where the teaching for growth idea came. At first, I started using Sight Reading Factory to assess kids individually. So every single kid reads by themselves as part of a semester final. Okay. And at first, I had kind of taken a page out of the book of some other types of literacy programs where, there's grade level reading expectations, for example, in English. And when my kids went through it, you got to read this level by this grade, or else you're considered behind, or you're ahead, right? And so I didn't know any better. And at first, for probably 3 or 4 years that we started doing the individual assessments, I was doing it that way, where I kind of had an arbitrary, based on the majority, the idea that by the end of ninth grade, a freshman should be able to read fluently on a sight reading factory level 2, and that by the end of 10th grade, it should be a level 3. And then, 11th grade and on, then we kind of let them go 4, 5, 6 at the, it gets way harder at 4, 5, 6 on sight reading factory. So I kind of had this idea of, at a beginning, choir student should be 2, 3, and 4 by the end. And that worked okay. It worked okay. It was, we heard and we saw a huge improvement in the overall reading level of the choir just by having the kids even doing it by themselves, which up until that point, we'd only ever done it as a group, right? So group only sight reading. And then we transitioned to this, like I said, arbitrary grade level individual testing. And we'd have the kids do a certain number of practices each semester, and they did a pre-test, and they did their final at the end of the semester. And it's weighted pretty heavily in their grade. So 5%, what we did it as 5% of the overall semester grade and or half of the final was based on their literacy. And they did okay, but kids fell through the cracks. And so I started kind of re-examining, all right, so what is it exactly that's causing kids to fall through the cracks? What is causing them psychologically to not be able to progress at the same level as others? And so I started to examine this, like why are we having some pretty darn good success, but still losing kids? We're still losing kids that just by the end, they never quite get to their level. They never quite reach the freshman level, or they never quite reach the sophomore level. They get stuck. So what I ultimately did was started toying with the idea of grading on growth. It started with our literacy, which is why I'm using this story for this little episode, is to think about this in the context of literacy, although it has expanded, this philosophy has expanded into all the areas that we grade kids now. But this was about 3 years ago, 4, going on 4th year, where I started thinking about grading on growth rather than grading on the achievement of a level. Okay. So much in our group work, we think about the achievement of a certain ideal choral sound, the achievement of a certain preparedness for a concert. And that kind of had driven the philosophy of the whole program. And then I started thinking, okay, well, but maybe that's really not what we're trying to do here. Maybe there is a group goal that is elitist or whatever. We want to sound good. We want to be an awesome sounding choir. And frankly, I'm not going to apologize for that. That is what we want. But can that coexist with individual goals for each student in the choir, in the class? Because ultimately it is a class where students need to learn it as individuals also. Can we have that elite choral sound ideal while individual students have academic goals that are based on their own needs and their own starting point? If I've got a kid who comes in 9th grade and has never heard of what a diatonic scale sounds like because or had to sing it with their own voice because they've never been in choir before, they've never been in band, never been in orchestra, never taken piano. They have no internal auditory frame of reference for what any of this stuff is supposed to sound like. They've never looked at a piece of sheet music before. Is it fair for me to hold that student to the same standard by the end of the semester as the kid who came in, being in the local honor choir for kids and taking piano lessons, and mom and dad put them up on stage all the time since they're 6? No, it's not fair. It's objectively academically not fair. And by taking that page out of the English courses books and using those grade level expectations, I didn't know any better at the time. I had to experience this in real life. But music's not like those classes. In other classes, we teach those subject matters to kids as in public schools and in private schools, but we teach it to them yearly all the time. And so when they get to a certain level, you could make some more arguments for grade level expectations. But in music, I don't know that you can, because they don't all start in the same place. Now, there could be some people listening to this that truly have a uniform feeder system with aligned curricular goals all the way from kindergarten to high school, and that's awesome. And we do a pretty good job of that where I am, but you still get kids who move there, right? You move there from somewhere else, and then you don't have the same approach uniformly across the entire country of how these skills are being taught and by what age they're taught and how many experiences you get to have with them and all of that. Okay, so here's ultimately what it boils down to. What we do now is we get each kid singing by themselves on Sight Reading Factory as soon as we can in the beginning of the year. And by doing that, what we're gauging is where is this kid now, right? Sometimes they turn in an exercise, or if we are in person at school, we do it with them, which is way less nerve-wracking for them. You'd be surprised by having their first experience recorded and submitted this year with virtual school has been really hard. It's easier in person. So now that we get that chance to do that, we're going to start doing that soon. But we get that pre-test out of the way early in the year, at least by October, okay, where we are collecting information on what level is this kid right now, like coming in the door. And then all we do is we ask them to start reading at that level until that level becomes so easy for them that they move up. And as long as they're faithfully going through that practice routine, here's the thing. I don't end up having to care if they progress a certain number of levels in a certain number of years. As long as they are faithfully turning in their practices, they just get better anyway. So even by taking the end goal off of the table, which there's where the psychology of this comes in. For a lot of kids, here's what I discovered. This was the secret sauce. By taking away that pressure of a goal to reach for their own level, they stopped looking at each failed attempt as wasted time. Because I think inadvertently what I'd been doing before was by putting level 4 by the end of 11th grade or whatever it is in front of them, they would see each failure as just one step further away from that goal. Okay. But by taking away the goal completely and telling them that the only goal is for you to turn in your practice each time and just get better each time. That's all we care about. We just want to see you getting better. And by practicing, we just know you will. Look, with no exceptions have I seen kids go through this faithfully and be a worse sight reader by the time they were done. They get better. So in that pre-testing process, it could run the gamut. We could have freshmen that are already reading level 4s, in which case they are then now being challenged at an appropriate level. We have some kids, and you all know they're there, who don't match pitch right away, especially the voice changers. Is it fair to expect them to read a level 1 even if their issue is matching pitch? No, so we create different exercises for them. Off-Sight Reading Factory, pitch matching exercises. Get that going first. And ultimately, the big point of this is that all of those kids, even the kid who comes in the door doing the level 4 and the kid who doesn't match pitch, if they make the choice to faithfully perform their practice regimen, their grade will be the same. The high-flying band kid who reads a level 4 and the kid who doesn't match pitch and has never seen music before can both get an A. And there is an episode attached in the show notes I did a year ago, episode 21, Everybody Can Get an A. And that's a more in-depth look at this. But there's another psychological aspect to this, that a lot of people do this, and I'm going to suggest that you rethink this. Grading literacy by checking off their mistakes, by counting their errors. Again, it's that psychological pressure thing that when we are under psychological pressure, we are worse sight readers. We are worse at reading the music. When we are aware constantly that every mistake that we make is going to reduce our grade, and see, these are the people that go through each measure and count a point for rhythm and a point for pitch. Okay, well, fine. And I understand why we do that. We want them to be good at it. But here's what I'm telling you. In my experience now, for doing this for 3 or 4 years, my kids are better sight readers than they have ever been before. Because so we got more elite, more elitist by grading in a less elite way. Okay. By not counting their errors, by not setting a goal of a certain level by a certain grade, but by just telling them the value is in getting better, the value is in practicing itself, and that's it. If you do that, you will get an A. So what then happens inadvertently is they more faithfully and more in a more relaxed way practice diligently. And by the time they are done, they get hugely better, bigly better. Okay, just lots better, which has been really fun to see. So I'll end with this. This is how we now grade them. If they're in person, so we've tweaked. Now we have two different ways. Right? If they're in person, which is my preference, we let them stop and start as many times within reason. We've got to keep an eye on the clock, get to everybody, but we let them stop and start their sight reading assessment as many times as they need. In other words, if we're in 3/4 time and they're 1, 2, 3, and I'm keeping an internal beat, and they have to pause and think about the next one, or maybe they sang do re, but called it do mi or something, and they recognized their own mistake. They went back, they fixed it, they stopped, started, they sang the wrong rhythm, but caught it and went back and fixed it. They go through that, and there is no limit to how many times they can correct themselves and fix their problem, and they still get 100%. All the way through a rubric down from 50 to 0 in terms of points. We just do it out of 50 points. But if they get it all right, and with tons of mistakes, but they fixed it themselves, they get 100%. They only lose any points when I have to interject and help. So let's say they got to the end of the level 2 exercise or whatever it is they're on, and they ended on the wrong pitch, and they didn't notice. It ends on do, but they weren't actually singing do, and so everything was right except for that last thing, and so they're maybe do is supposed to be there, and they're do, right, and they don't notice that they ended on the wrong pitch, and I jump in and I say, "What was your last note again?" I'm like, do. Can you sing do? Do. See, you had ended on the wrong pitch. And then in that case, I probably would give them a 49 out of 50 because they made a mistake and I didn't catch, or I had to help them catch it. Then we do weekly assignments with kids too, where they have to turn in 2 sight reading factory exercises each week at the level that we've told them is appropriate for them at that time. And that rubric couldn't be simpler. Because now we can set it up to, since they're submitting these online through Sight Reading Factory, we can make it so the rubric demonstrates whether or not they are done with the exercise. And again, we're not going to count their mistakes. So it's either done for full credit, which means they put in their faithful practice, or they didn't, in which case it's 0 points. But here's all we do. We tell them turn in a correct one or turn in your 12th one. So that's simple. Sight Reading Factory counts how many attempts. So you can set up the assignment to be max 12 attempts. And so what we're telling them we want them to do is just put in their reps. Put in your reps each week. And if you're not nailing the exercises on the 1st through 11th attempt, that's okay. You'll get there eventually. But by turning in your 12th, you will have worked for about 25 minutes on sight reading that day. You turn in your 12th, no matter how good or bad it is, and you get an A. Because what we're telling them is that it's going through the process on a daily or weekly basis that is what will make you better. These are like shooting free throws, right? You don't make all your free throws at basketball practice, but you still practice them over and over and over and over so you get better. So pretty simple, combining that weekly practice rubric with the process I just described to grade their assessment at the end of the semester. And by the way, you can do either of those things in person or online, which is what's great about it. But here's the trick with that. This is, again, the psychological thing with that way of grading sight reading. You're grading sight reading for real world applications at that point. Like in how many choral rehearsals you've ever been in, does it matter ultimately that you got it exactly right the very first time? Now, I do a lot of singing professionally as well. And when you're in a professional environment, you would like to be able to get it right the first time. But even then, mostly we're not sight reading. We've been given the music ahead of time. We're supposed to come prepared. It's not the same thing. What I want to see, what this literacy test for us now evaluates, is a kid's ability to catch and fix their own mistake. But if they are aware of a ticking metronome and their score going lower every time they make a mistake, think about how much you might actually be evaluating their nerves and not their reading ability. So by changing to this method over the last 3 or 4 years, like I said, we still get kids with performance anxiety. They come in, they freak out, and they start hyperventilating, and every once in a while we get a crier, right? But for the most part, that the number of kids that experiences that has gone way down. And then we start to develop that internal rehearsal skill of being able to read the music and recognize when you have done it wrong, and then just go back and fix it like it ain't no thing. That's what we want choral singers to be able to do. We don't need them to be perfect. We don't need them to be perfect right away, at least. We can give them a chance to work through their issues. And so sight reading becomes, in some courses and some school settings, means something different than what it means for me. Sight reading doesn't mean perfect nail it the first time and don't ever make a mistake. But interestingly, what that method has done for us is cause our kids to not make as many mistakes, because sight reading isn't nerve-wracking for them. It's a relaxed process where they know that if they do make the mistake, they'll be forgiven. They just need to fix it. And then that takes a lot of the anxiety away, ends up with better results. So just some food for thought today. I rambled a little bit, but I thought that you might get some brain salad, brain food out of this as well for your food for thought. And like I said, you can then take this idea and apply it to other areas that you grade as well. Just really briefly, we use it in terms of developing the vocal instrument as well. We have some rubrics that we use for singing tests. So this is when they're not reading, you're singing something you've already learned. How are we evaluating their technique? How are we evaluating their resonance and vowel choices and diction and expression and all those different types of things? You can also use a growth model there as well. Are you able to self-correct? Are you able to demonstrate that you understand the concepts? And in which case, the kid who takes voice lessons with the local professional opera singer or whatever is not at an advantage over the kid who can't afford voice lessons. They can still both get an A. They're both being asked to do the same things and to go to the level that they are. Think about it. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks, everybody.